if we can bring the Silver Fox Kelly Rempel back in. Brian in Hudson's Bay writes in on the text line, 902-518-3033. He says, as the kids would say, sweet jacket there, Remps. I'm just passing that along. And here we go, folks. What is that?
The family.
There's kind of a glare on it. Okay.
The family with the kids.
Love it. Okay, Mr. McMahon. Mr. McMahon is a documentary television miniseries that explores the influential yet controversial career of the professional wrestling promoter Vince McMahon. The documentary series features numerous prominent figures from the world of professional wrestling, including Hulk Hogan, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Bret Hart, Eric Bischoff, and Shane and Stephanie McMahon, Mr. McMahon's children. All 6 episodes of the series were released on September 25th. I burned through them all. I'm sure you did too, Kelly. Which episode was your lovely face shown in? I can't remember. 3, 4, 5?
I think it was number 3, the screw job one.
Right. You were leaning against the wall in the bowels of the Bell Center in Montreal after the biggest backstabbing in the history of pro wrestling.
Right.
Well, first of all, I guess, what did you think? I loved it. We loved it. And I'll just say this about the wrestling thing. When I for episode 1, my heart was like bouncing in the top of my rib cage because it brought me back to my childhood and I loved it and it was great. And as the series went along, it kind of reminded me how I got away from it. I started a family, was busy with career, and then the storylines got dumb and weird and just not my thing. You know what I mean? But I was a childhood wrestling fan. And I loved the series. But I wonder about you. Did you feel it was accurate? You know Vince McMahon personally, so what are your thoughts?
Well, you know what, Rod? The only way I can sort of describe that or answer your question is to say that when you're me, and full disclosure, okay, I'm a Bret Hart guy, okay? When I was with the Regina Pats, I brought him in to do an autograph session for the team back in 1993, and we've been very good friends ever since. He stood up with me at my wedding. He's one of my absolute very best dear friends. In fact, I just stayed with him 2 weeks ago for 3 days while I was in Calgary. So it's hard for me to be impartial, and it's hard for me to sort of see the other side, right? So, and I'll be the first to admit that. And I also know the story, and I know the truth. So when you know how one of your best friends to this very day gets tears in his eyes when he thinks about what happened to him all that number of years ago, and you see what it's put him through, and it's hard for me to be objective. So I've never been a big fan of Vince McMahon, the person. I've always been a very big fan of Vince McMahon, the wrestling promoter. Nobody did it better. I mean, as much as I can't stand the guy, and I think he's basically just excrement, I think that he was one of the greatest creative minds, certainly the greatest creative mind in the wrestling business, but you could argue one of the best creative minds and marketing savvy, controversial, who cares what people think? We're selling sizzle here. We're not trying to, send people into outer space or cure cancer. We're putting on a wrestling show. Let's put on a wrestling show and let's entertain people and let's do things that people are going to love, people are going to hate, but they'll talk about us. So you got to give him credit for what he was really, really, really good at. But the Vince McMahon, the human being, is a piece of shit. So it's difficult for me to... I mean, the cat's out of the bag. I mean, you saw the lawsuit that he's facing now with all of the, non-disclosure and Janelle Grant that's come out and talked about all of the horrible sex trafficking and all of the things and the different number of ways that you could. I didn't think that there was that many ways that you could violate somebody, and he's done them all. So he's a horrible, rotten human being. Terrible. So, but you got to give him credit for taking wrestling to a galaxy that nobody in a million years ever thought was possible back in the day. I mean, you got to give him credit for for the things he did well, but he's a rotten person, Rod. Terrible.
Oh, I think that's pretty clear. And I'm sitting there wondering if I could have ever worked for him. I don't know. Mandy in Edmonton writes in, she says, McMahon, Bret the Hitman Hart, legend. I remember when I was a kid and a fan of the WWE. Allie in Texarkana just writes a laughing, crying emoji, I think, with what you're saying here. She goes, he isn't wrong. That's from Allie in Texarkana. Trying to keep it together here. I'll be honest, as a guy that works in the recovery field and has a diploma in human behavior, Kelly, I saw those interviews with Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart and all the people, and they were sitting there almost like zombies going, I owe everything I have to Vince McMahon. It's like they were like zombies. They were like his slaves. Like you're interviewing survivors of narcissistic abuse. You know what I mean? I don't know. I saw what they said.
Yeah, I don't think Bret Hart ever said that he owed everything that he ever had to Vince. I think that I think here's the thing, Rod. Here's the takeaway that I take away, and I follow this stuff pretty carefully, is even the wrestlers that he was the most vile to, that he did things to them and treated them with such disrespect. And maybe I should only speak for my friend, because I can't speak for Hulk Hogan. I don't know Hulk Hogan. I've met him twice. Okay. But Bret Hart's one of my very best friends. Bret will never, to this day, if you sit down and have a beer with him at his bar in Calgary and you ask him, do you respect Vince McMahon as a creative genius? He would probably say yes. He would say that he took him when nobody believed in him, and he saw something in Bret that said, while I'm trying to find my next champion, when I'm trying to find the next Hulk Hogan, that's my guy. And he gave him an opportunity to be a 5-time world champion. And he believed in him. So he's not going to sit there and say that he didn't do anything good for his career. You can't deny that he gave Bret a great opportunity. And Bret to this day is a very wealthy man because of Vince McMahon. But just because you're very good to somebody and you put them on give them an opportunity. Oh, and by the way, Bret took advantage of that opportunity. He gave the same opportunity to lots of guys that fell on their face and they couldn't do it, right? It's like giving somebody in the NFL a starting quarterback job. You can give them the job, but there's very, very few guys that actually run with it and go on to be Hall of Famers. But the point is that Bret will never, ever deny that Vince gave him those opportunities. And when you go through those wars together and you fight for somebody and you would do anything for them for that long, you do develop a very, very, very close relationship, which is why it's incomprehensible that Vince screwed him the way that he did. And here's the thing that I always find interesting in these documentaries is these stooges that have worked for Vince, these brainwashed, mindless religious robots that just go through their whole life just like
zombies. Yes.
Yeah, they drink the Kool-Aid so much that they conveniently always forget certain things. And we don't need to do a deep dive into the Montreal screw job, but the fact is that when Bret agreed to sign with Vince McMahon, when WCW was offering him twice as much money to leave, literally twice as much. They offered him 2.8, Ted Turner and Eric Bischoff offered him $2.8 million to leave, and he took $1.5 million to stay. Would it Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan or any of those guys take literally 50 cents or 55 cents on the dollar to stay loyal? Nobody would do that. But he did that. And all he asked in return was a number of things. And one of the things that he asked was reasonable creative control in the last 60 days of his contract, which is what Hulk Hogan had in WCW. And basically what that means is that you get to sort of write your own story in your last 60 days with the company. So Vince forfeited his right to be able to tell Bret what to do in his last 60 days because he's the one that agreed to sign him for that. So it pisses me off when people say, well, he should have just done the job. He should have just did what he was told. No. If you're in the NHL and you have a no trade clause in your contract, the owner doesn't just get to trade you. It's in your contract. You signed the contract. Well, if you don't, and so those are the kinds of things that rub me the wrong way, as you can tell. But to get back to your initial thoughts.
No. Can I pause for a sec? Can I pause? Can I pause?
Yeah.
Just for those that have just tuned in. Allie in Texarkana says, Happy Tuesday. Weird to walk into wrestling talk. Randy from Winnipeg says, how do you really feel, Kelly? LOL. Randy from Winnipeg says, Crusher, Hitman Hart, Undertaker, my top three. Kelly is best friends with Bret Hart. You're not saying it. I'm saying it. He was his manager. Kelly was a regional WWF promoter. So that's why we're talking about it here today. Mark in Melford says, Rod, you need to have the Silver Fox on more. He's too busy. This is just the right amount. Kelly's a busy guy. So anyways, I just want to tell people that you have a long-standing history with Bret Hart and Vince McMahon. That's why we got into this. As a matter of fact, I do have another point. You want to wind up finish what you were going to say there? You remember?
Well, the biggest thing that Vince has lied about so many different things over the years that I think he's actually believes that they're true. And I think some of the idiots that he surrounded himself with back in the day, they've convinced themselves that it's true as well. I mean, if you tell the same lie 10,000 times, eventually at some point you actually start to believe that it's true. But I was there. So when people say, was this whole thing a work? Was this whole thing a hoax? Come on. I mean, there's no way that this were screw job. This is like these conspiracy theorists. Well, sorry, folks. I was there. Okay. I didn't see the punch, but I was outside the dressing room door and went for dinner with Bret and his family afterwards. And believe me, nobody's that good an actor. Nobody's going to sit there in front of 4 or 5 people, of which I was one of them, and break down and be sad and emotional because they're in on a conspiracy. I mean, so when people try to mitigate the severity of something like that, and they try to slough it off like, well, it's just Vince being Vince, the Ring Boy scandal. He's still to this day tries to pretend like he absolutely had no idea that any of these sexual assaults were going on. Come on. How can you possibly not? He went on the Phil Donahue show and lied through his teeth that he had absolutely no idea.
Wow.
When I know for a fact that people were telling him that. It's like he's just a pathological, narcissistic liar. But nobody promoted wrestling better than that guy. So you got to give him credit for that. And nobody's not giving him credit for it. They just think he's an insane pervert who should be in prison. And that's where he belongs, quite frankly.
Mandy in Edmonton says, Kelly, I love it. Love your take. I didn't know you were involved with wrestling. See, that's why we do these things. Leave it to me.
Yeah, just leave Rod in charge. He'll get the guy.
Ryan O'Radio in Atlanta. Ryan O'Radio runs WQEE Radio, where we air daily, Kel, noon to 2 Eastern. Ryan runs the station. He says, proud of the Hitman. He's a big wrestling guy, Ryan O'Radio at WQEE in Atlanta, just so you know. It took Kelly a while to realize. Remember, he used to come in and say, what are we going to talk about? Junior hockey? And they're not too big on that in Atlanta. But this
we talk about wrestling and the phone and the lights light up when we start talking wrestling. Isn't that crazy?
Well, I knew that it might.